Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be getting started in just a moment, just waiting to give people some more time to come in. My name is Jenna Thoritz, and I'm a senior program manager here at Humanitarian, and we're really excited to have you all here for today's webinar. So we'll get started in just a moment. Okay. So thank you everybody for joining us for today's session. The title is Global Development and Humanitarian Assistance is Crumbling. And this is a sector-wide conversation on what happens next. So that title might have been meant to be a little bit provocative. We'll get into that conversation throughout the next 90 minutes. But before I turn it over to our moderator and our amazing panelists, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, comments, resources, things you want to share for the good of the order, please do feel free to use the chat. You can also take a few moments now just to say hi in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're coming to us from, and maybe why you're excited for this conversation. Subtitles are available. You can click closed captioning in the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window. And we're also recording this session, so you can watch this back on demand. We'll be sending a follow-up email to your inboxes shortly after. So today we have a fantastic lineup of speakers, and I'll turn it over to them in just a moment. But would first like to introduce our moderator for today, my colleague Kim Kazinskis, who is our Technical Director for Organizational Transformation at Humanitarian, and I'll let her explain maybe what that means and what that looks like, especially in this moment. But yes, if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact us in the chat, and we really hope you enjoy today's discussion. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Jenna. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Happy to have this conversation with you today. As Jenna said, my name is Kim Kazinskis. I am the Director of Organizational Transformation at Humanitarian, and really what that means in terms of this webinar is that I have the privilege of having really interesting conversations every day around how organizations can change, how the sector can change, and really at the heart of it, how individual people and mindsets can change. And increasingly in 2025, that conversation is starting to look like how must we change, not just how can we do it. And so that's a little bit about what today's conversation is going to be about. So why are we here? Jenna mentioned the name of today's webinar. I think it says it all. Global Development and Humanitarian Assistance is Crumbling, a sector-wide conversation on what happens next. To the extent possible, in the next 90 minutes, we will really be celebrating and leaning into nuance. And so I would like to start here with this title by unpacking what we mean by that. So it's easy to feel like everything is kind of doom and gloom right now, but we want to recognize that not everything is crumbling. So it's fairly safe to say that what we have come to be known as foreign assistance, the foreign assistance infrastructure and architecture is probably crumbling. But that does not mean that other ways of meeting the world's global needs, including community responses, the whole plethora of ways that human needs are being met is being eroded. So in that way, I think we want to set the scene and lean into that kind of nuanced area. And then a sector-wide conversation. By no means do we think that this will be the only time we have this dialogue. This is really just the start. This cannot and it will not be the only sector-wide discussion that we have on what happens next. Really, this is the start of a long and probably messy conversation about where we came from, where we are right now, where we need to go, and most near and dear to my heart, how we get there, because the how of how we get there is going to be so important. So Humanitarian's programming at this moment in time is intended to meet this moment by bringing people together, by holding space, and by providing learning and support for those who are kind of on this journey and navigating these choppy waters. So, what are we going to do? Today, we're going to have a discussion on the topic of the day with a very, very interesting panel. We're going to listen and we're going to learn with each other. We're going to try to make sense of what is happening around us. And we are also going to then start to look to the future and imagine both what is possible, but then also what's probable. And then we're going to attempt to start to look at practical ways to bridge where we are today with where we would like to be. Now, that's a lot to do in 90 minutes. So as I said, this is the start of a dialogue. It's the start of a conversation. And we'll see where we get. We're not going to get to all the answers. I'm hoping that we can maybe generate some interesting ideas, plant a few seeds for you to nurture and grow in your little corner of the world until such time as we can meet again. So let us start with introductions. I am going to invite Ali Al-Mokdad, Jacqueline Asiimwe, and Andrew Julius Bende to introduce yourselves. Folks, the question that I have for you is if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and what I think would be most interesting and relevant to this discussion is share what perspective you bring to this conversation. If we were all sitting together in person around a table, what perspective are you bringing to the table? And that can be both personal and professional. So Ali, if you want to start, I called your name first, so let's go there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and this dialogue. My name is Ali. I am organizational psychologist by training and a strategic leader by experience. I have over 15 years of experience working across the humanitarian, development, and governance space. I have held leadership roles with INGOs, United Nations, Red Cross, Red Crescent Movement, across different field locations in Middle East, Asia, and Africa. And then I stepped into high-level global roles within headquarters. What I love the most about all the roles that I had, especially the global roles, is the engineering of an operation, the engineering of a strategy. And right now, what I'm doing is supporting different organizations, local and international, to engineer and optimize processes and try to push operations toward excellence, as well as looking at how they could look within the future and how to navigate the current challenges situation. And every one of those roles or those conversations that I'm having right now, and they are in different locations and different scopes and different sizes of organizations, they are shaping how I think about the sector and how I envision the future, and also how to optimize things to make it efficient to navigate what's coming next. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jackie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our guests. My name is Jacqueline Asiimwe. I live and work in Uganda. I have, for most of my professional life, worked in the nonprofit sector. I actually started as a law student many, many years ago. Probably some of you on the call were not yet born, in 1994. And I started out, as a women's rights activist, as a feminist, working in rural places all across my country. And through my career, did a brief stint with government and finally landed on the donor side of things for a brief time before I set up CivSource Africa, which is a philanthropy support organization. We're passionate about telling stories of African giving, philanthropy, and generosity. We're passionate about catalyzing local giving and building a community of philanthropists from the ground up. But we also do some grant making through our grant making arm called CivFund. We do grant making and fiscal hosting. But writ large, we've also been in conversations around and led conversations in Uganda around localization and shifting power. And what does this all mean? And what does it mean for us? And where is this all going? So I bring both personal perspectives, but also perspectives from the field, because I, through the organization, still in touch with various parts and shades of civil society. And we view it not just as the nonprofit sector called NGOs, but civil society literally writ large. CivSource also operates in South Africa and in Kenya, so bringing a slight Southern Africa nuance as much as I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. And Andrew.
Yes, thank you so much, and such a pleasure to be here, really, in many ways a privilege. Well, I'm Andrew Julius Bende, and just as Ali and Jackie have mentioned, share a lot of the history they mentioned. I've been working a lot in the civil society sector, both starting foundations in the sector and running foundations for some years, sitting on boards within the civil society sector, running advocacy campaigns, doing capacity building programs, consulting with a plethora of stakeholders and actors, and of recent working within the private sector, but specifically looking at social business. What has kind of been a dominant line, and I think that's what I'll try to position myself in today, is the bridging of what I like to call the global agendas or global policy or high-level policy with what I call the grassroots, or the real people on the ground. And I think this topic of aid is crumbling, or the humanitarian sector is crumbling. It really builds around this 80-60% of the people we normally go out to save. And how much of those do we listen to? How much of those do we involve in our strategizing and building these global agendas and things? So for a lot of my time, I've been focusing on how do you bridge the two knowledge domains, and create a world where, we look each other in the face and understand where we are, and we can build things that make sense on both sides. So I think that's what I will focus a lot on. But for a quick review, I'm a social economist. I've been doing a lot of economics, economic policy, social policy, public management, and right now sit as a senior associate at the Bioinnovation Institute here in Copenhagen.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, we need bridge builders. As we go ahead, we need to be thinking about a yes and approach. There are no bad ideas as we look ahead. So let's start by trying to make sense of all that has happened, and all that is happening. I don't think that we can underestimate the impact of this change for individuals, for organizations, and for the sectors. I can start by sharing a little bit what I've been seeing. At the individual level, people are really having a lot at risk, or a lot that is being harmed for them as people, right? It could be their livelihoods, it could be their life's work. For those particularly that work in our sector, for many, their work is really closely tied to their sense of self. So the sense of loss and the sense of grief and how that ties into sense of self cannot be underestimated in terms of it's not just a job. I think at the organizational level, Humantum has been collecting data for the last number of months. And some of the data says 55% of nonprofits have 6 months of financial resources remaining. 86% of organizations have already or are considering doing staff layoffs or furloughs. So it's really, and leaders, I talk to leaders every day, and they're really making impossible decisions with incomplete information. So that's happening at the organizational level. And then at the sector level, we're looking at social, systemic, sector-wide norms and systems that are being dismantled and reshaped at really just a radical and quick pace. So at all levels, change is happening. I don't think we can underestimate what the impact of that is going to be, even for those out there who see the silver lining in all of this change. And there certainly is always a silver lining, who are saying, it's about time, this change is necessary, all of these things. even for those folks, even good change is hard. Change is hard no matter what. It can be unsettling. And so what I'd love to hear from you all is, what are you seeing right now? What does it look like from the perspective of those you serve? And just as importantly, what does it feel like right now? I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Whoever wants to jump in can please do so.
Shall I start?
Please.
I could write I could write like books about this. But first I want to tell you what I tell managers or directors when I speak to them about this. I'm not here to keep things comfortable. I'm here to challenge your assumptions, and I'm here to push you to push your limits, to lift beyond your weight. And I think we need not only more professionals, we need truth tellers in the sector. And from my perspective, to answer your question, we are reaching our expiry date. We are reaching the financial limitations. The needs are increasing and the funding is decreasing. Our strategies are way beyond reach. Like it is, we designed strategies that it's becoming like a mission impossible to reach right now. Our operational modalities reaching its limitations. I think we actually have a global access crisis that we are not realizing. And adding to that, our credibility as a humanitarian development sector and non-government organizations and civil society organizations being questioned openly and publicly and in so many different countries. And to be honest with you, I am extremely worried. I want to pretend that it is not a stressful situation, but my stomach is saying something totally different. And those who I'm speaking to at field level, regional level, HQ level, in so many different countries with organizations with different sizes, they are not only tired, they are heartbroken. And what concerns me the most is that our leaders right now, they are not sure how to proceed and how to navigate this situation, and they need support. And I think from my perspective, this is one of the platforms that can help all of them. But to go back and answer your question, how do you feel and how you see the current situation? In a simple way, the house is on fire. And unfortunately, right now we are in a situation where some people, they are trying to run away, to leave the house. Others, they are trying to put this fire out to deal with the situations. And others, they are sitting and discussing how to rearrange the chairs in the house. And what I am extremely worried about is if we are not going to take actions right now as a sector, our house is going to be burned. We are going to lose the house. And maybe we are also going to lose the neighborhood. So from my perspective, there is a crisis right now. And this conversation is one of those, I will say, wake-up calls, but also to guide us through that. And I will tell you, those people who I'm speaking with, especially those leaders in the Global South, it's not only a job loss. Those people are supporting their families, extended families, and their communities, and they are already living in crisis. So there is currently like an economic crisis within the humanitarian staff, especially in the Global South. So to be honest, I think it is a concerning situation. I do see many leaders, they are trying to take actions, but they need support. They need such platforms. And as I said, the house is on fire right now. And I think we shouldn't discuss how to rearrange the chair. We should just take some actions and put this fire out.
All right, Jackie, Andrew, the house is on fire. What are you seeing?
So it's very interesting that Ali uses that, because when I was introducing myself, I'd wanted to start with a song from yesterday. She's just a girl and she's on fire. So now scratch that. I'm not using that song anymore. But what I mean, I resonate with what Ali says. And in fact, at CivSource, We do have a leadership program, and in fact, in a few weeks, are going to host a retreat. We do wellness retreats specifically for leaders because, like Ali said, they need support because we look to them both in times of plenty and in times of crisis. And we are all reaching for answers. We are all reaching for, the what next. And we collectivize leaders so that we don't think alone, so that you're not struggling alone in your own corner, but you're thinking together with peers, but thinking hopefully from a place of wellness, because that's where we want to start. And of course, coming to a retreat does not fix it, but it's one way to say, how do we collectively inhale and exhale? To think, to plan, to plot. And yes, indeed, when a house is on fire, there will be casualties. So how do we deal with the casualties that are happening and that will happen? How do we, as my mentor says, Hope Chigudu, how do we die honorably? What does it look like to have a dignified death, even in this situation? So that we're not even shaming people who have to close their doors. Not even just close, lock their doors. So what will it look like to hold space for those for whom this is literally the last curtain? And there will be some, we have to agree. And then how do the rest that will stay on for a few more months and years, what do we need to do different? How do we need to do different? And I know one of the things that everybody talks about is solidarity, but what does that mean in practical terms? What does sharing resources look like? What does sharing operational modalities look like? What do we need to share that we haven't been sharing before? It's great to share information, it's great to share ideas, but are there things we haven't yet shared that we need to lean into in this moment? And then, yeah, the house will be saved, but do we know when? I don't know. And because the time horizon isn't definite, isn't clear, how do you plan now for then? Yesterday, what I talked about, how do we also now start to think generationally? So that even as we are rebuilding now, we are building a firm foundation to the extent possible, of course, for those that are to come. So it is, I think, those 3 shifting spaces, and they're not even static, right? Today you might be standing for 2 years and then something else hits you and you're with those that have to leave honorably. So I'm not even presenting them as though they are fixed in terms of thick lines, but that's what I see in the space.
There's a lot in there that we can unpack. I'm hearing, yes, the house is on fire, and when the house or the neighborhood is on fire, do we come together in solidarity, in radical solidarity, to put it out and to rebuild together, or do we all grab what we can and run, right? How do we react? And for those, I was just having this conversation yesterday, for those who unfortunately do have to sunset their organizations, it takes time, intention, and resources to do it in a way that reduces harm. And how do we start to have that conversation? Andrew, what are you seeing from your space?
I mean, I can't, I don't, I don't think so far away from the perspectives that have come. But as I always try to pack, and as you rightly say, Kim, there's a lot in there in what has been said. So imagine a context where it's, yes, it's crumbling, and I think you started with this. It's crumbling, and what's crumbling, and is it crumbling? And is what is crumbling that should crumble? Are there things that are not crumbling that we can look into and tap into? So there is a lot of things there. So I've just drawn on my paper. We are talking what this space has: economic consequences. This space has emotional consequences. We have psychological consequences. We have social culture consequences. So there's so many angles this can go, and this is kind of you know, if you map what a human being is, I think the sector is facing this kind of angles of looking at it. Now, if you ask me, if the house is on fire, and it is, but it's not the first time either. We have seen time and again that the house comes on fire. And you know what? There's so many examples of how the fire has burnt down big houses and hearts have grown. So I really want to try and come from that point of view. And again, just say, this is going to go on for some time, but stop, take a break, look around. What is there to save in the house? And what is the most important thing to save in the house? So you know, when we saw USAID closing, I think the most important thing at that point was to also raise the question of, how about life-saving aid? Should that go? And I think there has been good reaction around life-saving. And I think that kind of leadership right there is maybe the most important leadership right now. Stop, look around. What is there to salvage? And what is it that if we lose, we can't come back? And what is it we can lose and rebuild? So I think that's how I'm seeing this. And trust me, I agree that a lot of us are at pains. I grew up in Uganda, lived there for my first 30 years. I have a lot of family, big family, grew up in rural Uganda. I'll come into that story when the time matures in these 90 minutes. But I think that right now we are looking for leadership, and I think, and I will thank you again for organizing this session here, because I think we can start framing where do we go with this.
I didn't set him up for this segue of futures thinking, but I think that's where we have to go next. The fire has burned down big houses and huts have grown. Is that going to be the future? And then what is, you know, when things are burning down, what is the most important things to save? Not everything needs to be burned down. So, let me take a little bit of a step back. I often like to start these types of conversations with language, because language is important and language is powerful. Language often reveals things about the mental models that are at the root of the systems that we inhabit. And so my question to you is, how do we define this work that we do? And let me tell you a little bit where this question comes from. Increasingly, the words that we use to talk about this work that we do, to me personally, is feeling a little bit outdated. Is it aid? Is it development? Is it foreign assistance? It's feeling a little bit outdated in these conversations, and yet I don't necessarily have the answer to what the this is that we're doing. And so I ask you, as we look to the future, what do you think that we should or that we will call our collective efforts? Will there be one term? Will there be one monolithic term? Will there not be? What language are you using? Whoever has good thoughts on this, feel free to jump in.
I usually don't like to talk about terminology, because I worked in some organizations where we spent weeks and months to decide what to call something, and then we forgot the main point. But from my perspective, the term NGO is just outdated. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I think it came 1940 something. It was in the UN Charter to clear things, and then boom, we are pretending that we are not influenced by governments, but we receive funding from them. So I think the term doesn't make sense, but I'm not going to argue now what do we call ourselves. I think from my perspective, the terms that we are using, they are mainly either they don't fit what we do right now, or actually the current situation. And I think we are not just part of a sector anymore, because we are also implementers in a way or another of the sustainable development goals, and soon to the extended sustainable development goals and all that. So I think we are part of global public good movement or something like that, where we are implementing those different activities, different projects in solidarity with other organizations and institutions to for public good. So I'm not exactly sure what we call it right now. I need to think about that, but I definitely think that we have the tendency of using terms that they don't reflect what we are doing right now. And to be honest, one of the things that I'm worried about is that we have a bit of branding challenge right now. When it comes to INGOs or foreign aid or etc., we are publicly challenged. And in different countries, now I'm hearing voices, political voices from governments questioning what we do. So I think we must take that into consideration as well when we are thinking about what the language that we are going to use and the terminology. But in general, in principle, I think keeping, calling ourselves NGOs, humanitarian actors, aid workers, development professionals, they don't reflect exactly what we do. We are part of a larger movement, which is this global public good movement. That's from my perspective.
Okay, I'll jump in, Ali. And I like the way you framed this, Ali, actually. It's like this global movement, delivering public good. I like that term in a way, but I'll not qualify it as what we call it next. So you said something that was interesting. Forgive me if I'm putting you on the stand here. Implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Then it takes me back to 2015 when we were at the transition from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the argument at that time was, so the Millennium Development Goals were more a top-down. So now we have this new framework where everyone can read themselves in. And at that time already, and 2 years on, we kept on defining, but how can the same Sustainable Development Goal, gender equality or access to health, be exactly the same in Copenhagen and in rural Uganda, in Iganga district, where I grew up? And I remember we had this long discussion on, so how do we actually operationalize a framework that gives us comparability? Many years later, actually, you are able, at least in some degree, to take indicators from the Sustainable Development Goals and map that against a specific context and show progress of where we are on these different. Now, at that time, we were also, and thank you, Jackie, for mentioning, the decolonizing leadership from the global south and things like that. And at that point, we were also discussing some very particular words that, and I will not try to say it's a humanitarian sector, but words like empowerment. The whole history of the aid sector stems from a colonial mindset, let's say that. And that has meant that whenever we act in that partnership, on one side is resourced, rich, and able to save, one on the other side, who by definition then is poor, weak, and needing. And at that point, we were arguing that, yes, we know there is disparity in resources, but I think this one would not be in the world if this one wasn't there. And if we are going to create equality in the development aid sector, then we need to start seeing each of these actors on both sides as human beings. I remember when we started a small organization here in Copenhagen, Civil Connections Community Foundation, which we built for many years before I left as a director to do what I do now, we discussed a lot about if you're building a project from the grassroots, with a grassroots group, how do you position that and to a funder for that sake, and empower the partners on the other side of the coin? And I remember arguing in a workshop that, look, when we do a project, let's say in agriculture, with a farmer community in rural Uganda, again, that's where I know, this community has been farming for so many generations. And when you come to them to write a project, the first thing they say, oh, we are so poor. We are poor farmers, and we wake up at 5. If we don't wake up at 5, then we don't have food the next season. And my question to them when we are discussing this with them, I say, why do you wake up? If it's too hard and annoying and you're poor, why do you wake up? Don't wake up. Stay in bed. And I remember the group looking at me, startled, and saying, what do you mean? Then we will not have food. Then I told them, then you need to change it. Then you need to say that you wake up so you get food, and that's your empowerment. If you don't get food, and you're producing food through agriculture, and I know it's easy to say, but if you turn it around, and what people do is actually their own empowerment, their resource, their agency in it, then the dynamic starts changing. And I think that at this point, as we look for the new wording, it's that dynamic we are looking for. Is this the time? Is this the time where we say, well, life saving has to be there, but we have this, maybe 20% of what we have been doing, the life saving has to be there. We have to work for that structure to be saved. But what about the remaining 80%? Is that where we should actually go in and start changing minds and processes, so people start to see their every day as worth and not dependent on someone somewhere giving them? So I think that's what I see. And whether we call that the aid sector, humanitarian aid, whether we call it the international global movement doing social good, whether, I think that's where actually I see this should go. I hope it goes.
And these are the mental models that underlie. This is why it's so hard to find the right 2 or 3 words, because the complexity and the nuance of the mental models that underline it all are so complex. Jackie, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh boy, what are my thoughts? My mind went to Proverbs, and using the local language, it's hard to find one word. The word that came to mind was the collective, but here are my thoughts. That unfortunately, maybe part of what needs to crumble in this house is that while the assumption was we all entered the same door, we know that in the house, it was stratified along class, along race, and access to resources. So even the first wave of localization of INGOs became them shifting their headquarters from the west to the south, but still getting the best piece of the pie, right? So still it was the us them, right? So I don't know that we've ever, yes, we are in this thing together, but not together. And that's some of what has to go. When you say, what do I see? Unfortunately, in Uganda, and I don't know what it's like for the rest, it's almost, you almost hear the undertones of, now you know what it feels like, because we've been telling you and you didn't want to listen, that we were threatened with this constant need to survive, with this constant need to, this existential question has been front and center for us. Now you see, and I know, of course, in Africa, we say you shouldn't dance on the grave of the dead, but it's almost to say, but first let me have my laugh, because surely we were telling you and you never thought it would ever happen. right? That's why I needed to first
I think we lost you for a second there,
has
Jackie.
to be
Oh, you're back. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I'm saying maybe some of that has to be shaken out of the system. And that's why I'm calling it a collective. And the proverbs that come to mind are things like, "Agalia awamu gegalume nyama." Those that bite together are the ones that break down the hard bone, the hard meat. Or things like, "A single bangle cannot jingle alone." For those of us that wear bracelets, right? As a lone bracelet doesn't jingle, you need other bracelets up and down your arms. One hand cannot kill a louse. Again, and all these are pointing to we need each other. If we've never thought we did, I hope this shows us that we actually do. Another proverb, one person cannot wrap their arms around a baobab tree because these are huge, massive trees. So all of this showing that we need a collective. The last one I will talk about is that there's always room at the dinner table. Yes, we had built separate tables in the same room. And even when you bring them together, you're still sitting, I'm at my table, you're at your table. But now we need not just there's always room at the dinner table, how we used to eat in our families on one plate, so that you're all tasting the same food. Because you can be at the same dinner table, but my plate is smaller than yours, right? So how do we think together as a collective and as a weaving, right? If you think of a basket where the strands are so intricate, you can almost not tell where one starts and one ends. Maybe that's what we need to go to. But where we were coming from is that, yes, we were in the same house, but still so siloed.
Yeah, I love that. I love that imagery. And with the basket, when one strand starts to unravel, the whole thing falls apart, right? So there really is that dependency, and there's an acknowledgement of that dependency. So we started with this kind of conversation of what traditional, aid, development, NGO, and we ended with collective. And I put here in the chat a link where there's this idea of what if it becomes broader than even those who do this for a living, right? If we change from becoming an international development sector, an industry, to an international solidarity movement, and whoever wants to be part of this movement can contribute, is the idea that I think we need to start to continue to explore. So I think the next logical question then is aid, and I'm going to put it in these air quotes until we come up with a better word, this thing that we're doing, is it still relevant? And what I mean by that is for the traditional actors at play, so often many of the people in this call today or listening in, what does it mean for us as individuals? What does it mean for organizations? Are we still relevant? And then how do we reconcile the legacy of our work with this need for transformation? Because this is where a lot of this tension sits. This is where some of you alluded to the power of words, the power of language. When we need to transform, that often means giving things up. And so how do we recognize the sense of worth, the sense of self, the sense of value? There are tangible and intangible things that we derive from our relevance and our place in this system. If we are talking about transformation, real transformation, what does that mean in terms of relevance? Jackie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you because we had a prep call conversation yesterday, and you had some really interesting thoughts on this.
And of course, when you start with me is where I didn't hear. Please repeat.
I'm asking. Right? That's okay. Yeah. That's okay. Because someone else on the call probably also didn't hear. They were off getting a cup of coffee. So the question that I'm asking is, we're talking about language, but is the traditional aid system still relevant? And what does that mean for us as individuals who are operating in it and as organizations? Both in terms of kind of power that we're all giving away, but then also how we are reconciling the legacy of our work with this need to transform.
Okay, so this is the thought that has jumped into my head, and I will use a family situation, a family metaphor, and I hope I'm understood. That maybe what transformation might look like, we diminish in terms of the importance we had given ourselves. I am at the point as a 55-year-old with parents that are 83 and 78. At one point, I was totally dependent on them as a child. But now as a 55-year-old, the conversation is different. And now maybe they are reliant on me for certain things. Are they still my parents? Absolutely. Am I still their child? Absolutely. That will never change. But the way we dance is different for different moments. But I think we have, and that's why I'm saying that maybe for now we have to diminish in importance and somebody else takes the center stage, and it's okay. We're still family, we're still important, we still have our identity. But I think for the longest time, we've been the show has been about us, and it's all about, and we're the ones grabbing, and we're the ones taking everybody's space, and sometimes that's how we have behaved. So how about and my diminishing, my stepping away doesn't make me lesser. It just is realizing that maybe this moment needs another part of us to step forward, to shine, to lead. And it doesn't always have to be us. That is what came to mind.
I love that. Thank you. Andrew or Ollie?
I think the thing is that the word transformation usually puts me in action mode. So I'll try to, before going into some suggestions or recommendations around that, I would say that I think the principles of aid in general, like solidarity, response, protection, etc., they are more relevant than ever. Of course, the part around solidarity and response, of course, they are more relevant than ever. But the models we are using right now to implement that are outdated. And I think they were designed for an era where we needed like this quick parachuting in and out. We need to respond quickly to an emergency. But right now, political situation is different. The type of crises are different. Political restrictions are different, and the systematic inequality is increasing in so many different ways. So I would say that the principles of aid, they are relevant more than ever. But when we are talking about the modalities, it's not relevant. It's outdated. It must evolve. And I think in general, our values are still relevant. But our models must evolve, our governance must evolve, our governance and the way we are dealing with different partners must evolve. And one of the main important things from my perspective, our leadership mindset must evolve. And that's one of the key things, because we are not here to protect the system. We are here to design what's next. So the principles, yeah, they are relevant, but the modalities, the governance, the way we are leading our activities, they must evolve. And I'm more than happy to share some thoughts on that transformation and how it would look like in action.
We'll see if we have time for this, because of course my next question is, first of all, there's a lot there, right? The principles of aid, our values are still relevant. I think that's good news, right? But the modalities are outdated. So then the next obvious question I'm sure people are thinking right now are, okay, if the modality within which I work, if my organizational structure, purpose, partnership, all of this is outdated, how do we evolve, and how do we do that in real time while also, keeping the trains running on time, if you will? So those are the big questions of our day. We may not if we don't get to it today, we'll continue that conversation, but I think it's important to frame it that way. I also like this idea, and this is not going to come as a surprise to folks, but we need to keep it top of mind. We are not here to protect the system. We are here to design what's next. And it's easy to say, and it's hard to do when we are invested financially, personally, physically. So let's just let's lay that out there as well. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Oh, it's actually kind of unfair come after Jackie and Ali. They are just blowing you away. But Kim, as you asked the question, there's two words that were clear, and I think back to language: aid and power. Those are very clear words for me, and those are the words that have defined the era. So again, what makes aid even? Why are we wanting to rethink it? And why are we questioning it? How can something good that should help others be questioned? I think it's the link to power. Who controls what it does? And I think when Ali talks about the modalities, I've argued for so many years. When I'm writing a proposal or reporting for a grant, why am I reporting it the way I'm reporting it? Why do we have these templates set in tone? Why can't it be a continuous conversation if it was an interaction of helping each other? So those two words for me actually are key. And is aid relevant? Should we change the term? Let's change the term and say, well, it's human interaction. When your neighbor doesn't have salt, they come and knock on. When your neighbor loses their child, you take wood, you take food, you go and clean the house for them. When they are grieving, I wrote a paper back in 2007 around the relevance of aid to Mozambique at that point, in a time where the country was at war and where there was civil war, there was conflict, there was broken infrastructure. So aid coming into that country was so relevant because then they could maintain the basics of health and service delivery. Uganda had the same kind of, I wrote another small paper on Uganda's health system. At that point, it's funny because this was Idi Amin's time when he was president. And I went back and looked at how Uganda benefited from the primary health care package that was brought in through aid at that point. And Jackie, if you look back and if you ask Jackie, the primary health care package actually in Uganda did a lot in the 80s and early 90s and on. And you know, when you look at how that was implemented, thanks to what happened, but again, we are looking at national programs here. But now, if you bring that to let's call it a sector, or we as organizations, again, the power we have brought into it, and I think, Jackie, you alluded a little bit into this, is really what needs to be redefined. And right now I work with business, and I mean, products from Copenhagen end up on the other side of the globe. Products from China are here in Copenhagen. So there will always be global exchange. There will always be global interaction. We have had lessons on globalization within the global management paradigm. It's the way and which power that comes into those interactions that will define what comes next. And I think, and that's what we are trying to call for here. There is no need for reducing the interactions. There is need for changing the templates and the power in those interactions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so some things that I want to kind of tease out from what you just said, Andrew. Yes, these two words, aid and power. And can we unpack those and ask the questions, not is the system still relevant, but is aid relevant? And what I love what you said, Andrew, is, or what you started to allude to, was that it's not going to be universal. There may not, in the future may not be monolithic. There may not be one big sector or industry, and maybe it never was. We just got lazy and started to use these shorthand terms. But for example, aid may be relevant in specific contexts. It may be contextualized, but it might not be relevant in another context. And so how do we start to live in the gray, lean into that nuance, and be okay with that, and build that into the way power moves, the way our templates and our structures are? I think that's really interesting. And so the question that I ask you next, all of you, is what will the future look like? I think if we strip away some of these terms and some of the assumptions that we've long worked within, and we kind of say, okay, well, what is the purpose of this thing that we do, which is to meet urgent human needs, really, at a global scale. So it's not just, at the community level, but at a global scale, how do we meet human needs? We know we're going to have to do more with less. So how do we do more with less, with shrinking resources and increasing restrictions at a global level? How do we ensure that we still meet these urgent human needs? Is it going to be a more, puzzle piece, piecemeal, contextualized way of doing things? Is there do we need to rebuild the full architecture? How is this going to look if you put it on your visionary futures thinking hat? And if you have the answer, then you win the day.
I think this isn't temporary. This is what's going to happen for the next decade. And I actually think that stretching our budgets right now is not the solution, and structuring our organization also not the solution. We need to reimagine and rethink it. And just to share some practical things, we have now from my perspective, two main things to look at. The first one, I like to call them the small C, or the small cuts, small, tiny things. They are not going to make major changes, but they make impact strategically. Like if we start doing those things, it's going to change bit by bit, and then we will see impact in the end. Things like thinking about this structure we built around meetings, working group, reference group, task force, steering committee, etc., to review one simple thing. Or think about how we design our policies, processes, and tools in an organization. How we communicate and the structure that we have different layers of compliance and risk management, HQ, region, country, area, site. So just rethink about it. Maybe a bit of trust more than control. And also visit things around, small things like, do you really need a representation office or a regional office? Maybe you merge it with another organization. Maybe instead of having full, team and facility and security protocols and IT support and fleet and etc., maybe you could leverage another organization facilities in the region or representation office. And in general, I think that those are small tactics, small things, and that you could build on them to rethink and in a small way. Now, the capital C or the massive cuts, I think sometimes they are they are extremely needed. Things like, full restructuring, making localization your new primary operational modalities, joint country operations. Instead of going alone to a country and implement programs, join another INGO that is doing that and, leverage the same facilities or desk support. Or things like exploring partnerships. And this is one of the main things. And this is one of the main messages that I want to give today. Partnerships. We must engage with private sector. We must engage with foundations. We must explore, those regional actors like African Union, the Gulf, and those regional actors. So I think those, the capital C, it means taking those major shifts. But in general, as I mentioned, less isn't temporary. it is the situation for the next decade. This stretching the budget is not going to be the solution. And just to add one more thing here, I think in Geneva we are designing our programs and our operations based on what we did before. And one of the best practices that I have seen and practiced with those organizations that I'm guiding right now, first principle thinking. Go back exactly to the key questions. Why you are doing this? What's the reason you want to work here? What do you want to achieve? And one of my favorite things is this zero-based mindset or zero-based budgeting or operations, where instead of copy-pasting what we had before, we start from scratch. Instead of taking the structure and edit and design and rethink it, no. Start from zero. What type of roles you need in the organization to feed the impact that you want to achieve and build it up. So I think those two practical things, first principle thinking, zero-based mindset, and small things that could bring an impact and large things that could also bring an impact. This is how I think we could do more with less.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we look ahead, you're right. The sector is constricting, whether we like it or not. That's not a blip. That is a trend, and that's the reality that we are now living with. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? There's a whole conversation happening in the chat, or that you started, Ali, around models, around organizational models, around solutions. Stay tuned. Sometime in April, Humanitarian will be hosting. We're cooking up a webinar just on org transformation models. We have all sorts of interesting conversations lined up for that. And then I also heard you talk about trust and risk, which I think is something that we've been talking about for decades, but is going to become so important now as we challenge ourselves to walk the talk and live the values along this process of change. It, again, one of those things that's easier said than done. We can have principles and values on our website, but when we make decisions, when we design programs, how do we go back to basics and go back to that? Andrew and Jackie, any thoughts that you have on this question of what the future will look like and how we do more with less to meet these needs? How that will look structurally, if you will?
Okay, let me weigh in a little bit here. And this is because I'm terrible because it's in the small details, and it's actually in the words. It's a word like we, and I say we is an interesting word for me right now, because you know what we are discussing, and actually whether it's in the short term, medium, or long term, it's going to take both the macro, meso, and micro. And so if you look at that interplay, which unfortunately is actually the axis that has created the models. So whether the models have been created up on top and taken downwards, it's going to take a movement across that axis, the entire axis. And so that's why, for me, the word we is interesting here. And let me go to where I like to work best. And where I like to work best is on the grassroots. So I'm looking at very small grassroots organizations, because again, at the end of the day, if you look at a country like Uganda, 70% rural, and when we say we are going to improve education, a lot of the rural spaces are really the ones that we are going to work with, except for the growing slums in the cities and things like that, which I would classify as rural. So what could we do there? And maybe before I go there, I have written a word here, painful necessity. It's a painful necessity that we have to do this, because if we don't change the ways we do, there is no resources for it. So we will have to cut down, we will fire one person at a time, and of course we can cut down on the processes and become more lean. But I think the painful necessity for me is, Ali, you alluded to, why are we doing this? Why are we in this? For who? And with who? So I think those are interesting questions for if there is an organizational leader right now. Try to go back and ask yourself, why are we doing what we are doing? For who and with who? Because when you answer that question, and maybe you add the question, is this necessary? Then you'll actually start yourself defining exactly what you want to do next. Or to actually open up to saying, you know what, let's join hands with the other one and the other one and the other one, and we actually do exactly the same. For many years, we have worked in civil society organizations, and you are in different organizations in Denmark, and you have a project in the same local place in Uganda, and you have never talked. And one project is on youth education, and another project is on political activism. Those two can be combined, and you can do. So I think that's where we have to go. But it's difficult, and it's going to be difficult because that's how we think, and that's how it's structured. So it has to be this painful necessity for principle that we go for. And I normally tell people that, you know, when we are saying these things, and I hope I talk for everyone here, sometimes we sit in a privileged space, because I mean, I'll at the end of the day, I'll have a salary at the end of the month, and but some spaces people will lose jobs if this is the direction of this reprogramming. But I think that will start there. And then, of course, government, the national has always had a challenge with civil society, because civil society is acting as you know, with a lot of resources, with these processes and etc. And we are saying to the government, you're corrupt and you're doing that. But if we change our ways, I think we can actually hold governments accountable. Can we? I don't know. But I think we can. Maybe. And I don't know, maybe it's wishful thinking, but maybe. But then I would also hope that you know, the changing, it's I shouldn't go into the political realm right now. I'll drop out of that. I'll not even go there. But I think staying on the micro, where I think we make it makes sense for us to adjust, and that's where we really have the power to change things. And of course, for us that are involved in the, you know, upwards, the macro systems, I think we can be ambassadors on how we really start thinking, and especially, you know, articulating things like the power we bring in the way we are programming and the demands we put, but also the way, the processes we use and we work with.
All right, so thinking about all the different connections between all of those different the different levels. Now, Jackie, I'm eager to get to the so what question, but I want to give you space if you have any thoughts on the what will the future look like question.
Yeah. So it's interesting that Ali and Andrew have raised two W's, so I will only add another one. So Ali asked the why. You know, to change anything, I think you have to go back to that existential question, why? And it's answered in myriad ways. Why for you as the body that comes to do this work every day? Why for your organization? Why for that? So why? And I love the we. Oh, so small and yet so powerful. We were looking for what to call it, but the we, and there's a Ugandanism. It is we, because yes, nobody's coming to save you. So the we, and then so what I will add is the will. Are we actually willing? Because it's one thing to know your why, understand your we, but are we willing? Because if we don't come from a place of, and we talk about political will for others, do we have it here? Another Ugandanism that we often joke about, sadly, is, you know, we have teachers who are pretending to teach and students that are pretending to learn, and both sides know they are pretending. Of course, when, you know, on our bad days when we don't like what's going on. But yeah, it can be the same way here, right? that we can pretend that we want things to change. We can pretend that this is an inflection point. It is an inflection point. We can pretend we want to change, but do we really want to? And how do you assess your will? Because if you don't, then you won't act. However many webinars we have, however many ideas we put on the table, that will is absolutely important, and only you and your organization can answer that. So the why, the we, and the will.
I love that. That's so know your why, understand your we, and so important. Are we willing? And I think that's sometimes the piece that gets lost in these conversation and planning moments. Okay, here's what I want to get to then. So then the inevitable question, what do we do about it? Right? How do we practically bridge this divide between today, this where we're trying to make sense of all that's happening, and this vision for the future? And let me just tell you that I personally have been wrestling with this question quite a bit, of how lately. My feeling is that it's possible that we collectively lean into radical solidarity, where we celebrate our differences as superpowers. Jackie, I think you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, right? That there's room for everyone, that everyone brings, that, not one person cannot put your arms around the baobab tree, right? We all need to be there in order for this to happen, where we are amplifying each other, where we're collaborating where possible. And in my bad days, I think that it's more probable that our fear as humans will be activated, and that we will react with a scarcity mindset, and we will start to compete with each other over space and resources and positional power. And so my question to you all is, how do we find the common ground? So we all come at the problems from different perspectives, different experiences, different natural tendencies. What are the core values, the core principles that we can all agree on, even if our methods of how we achieve change are different? And then, just as importantly, and some of you have already alluded to this, what are the values or assumptions that we need to let go of or throw out? So what's the container that we can all live within, or the guardrails that we can all walk as we build this bridge, where we can all allow ourselves to be who we are, but still have that common ground? You're laughing, Ali. Do you have an easy answer? Because we can just wrap this up.
First, I want to say that I was extremely disappointed when the cut happened, and I didn't see a secretary general or a CEO or executive director going online, speaking from the heart, and be vulnerable with us, because we are all vulnerable. I was just waiting to see someone that says something to reflect the pain that we have right now. I've seen statements and well-crafted letters and advocacy messages, but for me and many others who are, collaborating with me and speaking with me, we waited someone to speak from the heart and be vulnerable, because we are all vulnerable. So this is a side thing. Now, the second thing, I was just hoping and wishing and imagining that now our leaders in the sector, INGOs and foundations, those leaders, they are going to gather, to be together somewhere and sit and be like, we are going to take an action, we stand together in solidarity, etc. I've seen nice papers, they all signed it, but I was just hoping that someone, somewhere, a platform, bring those leaders together into one room, those secretary generals, CEOs, etc., and be like, let's do something about this. And if someone decided one day to do that, please let me know. I'm more than happy to volunteer my time for that. Now, to go back to your question, I think our common ground in the sector is clear, human dignity, the response, the purpose that's driving all of us. But when it comes to the how, or what tools or what things we can do, aside from the things that I already mentioned. Internally, simplification is number one. Processes, governance, the way you operate, simplification. This is number one, a starting point. The second thing, and I mentioned that before, I mentioned this every single day, trust over control. Those assumptions around risk management, compliance, and. You need to have a bit of trust. This is number two. Number three, I mentioned that, I'm not going to go into the details again. There's zero-based budgeting, build the budget from scratch, build the structure from scratch, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the key things is that now when we are designing programs, we must think, you put our principles as one, true partnerships. Do you really need to go full, as main implementing partner? Do you really need to implement in that location? And I really think joint country programs and joint country operations is a bit underestimated and not explored enough in the sector. I've seen some organization using that and they went through some challenges. I'm guiding a few others on designing how that could be, but I really think we should explore that, as one of the key principles. And as I mentioned, again, first principle thinking on how we design and how we implement and how we do our programs. There is no need for the copy paste things, but also to be realistic, this is not easy. This is extremely difficult. I had said the same to some leaders and in some board meetings, but when we wanted to translate that into action, it was extremely challenging. And the main reason is because our systems are built based on assumptions. So we had to challenge every single assumption to go back to the core. And this is like extremely difficult thing to do. But when we have leaders who really want to make that impact, it gets a bit easier. But I still really hope and wish to see some leaders who are being a bit vulnerable with us, because we are vulnerable, and a platform that bring all those leaders together and be like, let's take some actions together.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with you, Ali. A lot of many of the things you just mentioned are not necessarily new ideas, and yet we now find ourselves in a different situation where maybe some of the structures there's more wiggle room to change, because trust is a mental model that we need to shift in order to get to different ways of partnering, for example. Jackie and Andrew, what are some of the kind of common, what's the baseline here? What's the common ground that we can all work on?
Jackie, you start, I start.
I'm still breathing and sighing, Andrew. Go ahead.
All right, I'll start.
Thank you.
I like where we are, and I think, Kim, what you started with opening this session is it crumbling?
Yeah.
And I think the first place is, do we agree? Do we agree that it's crumbling? Then let's do something. I think that there's just so much power in accepting. If we get that acceptance, because I mean we can suggest so many things. The whole human rights framework. No one says the human rights framework is not necessary. It is. And yet we still have human rights that are being broken. So I think what has succeeded in places where the human rights have succeeded is that people have accepted that that's exactly what we want to do. That's the society we want to have. So I think the first place is to accept. And two, I like to use the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm really looking forward to what comes after that. And that's because it's so practical and visible. The Millennium Development Goals were 10. They had these, broad suggestions on how we can reach a more sustainable world. But if you compare those with the Sustainable Development Goals that had broken down to detail, you see exactly what you could do in each of them and change. So I think I'll go there and say, look, we are in a world where data is becoming more available, more usable, more accessible. Let's define what we want to reach. Let's define, let's not assume, let's be concrete. Because when we get concrete and we break down what steps we need to take, then the remaining thing is to commit. And then I think we can actually mobilize and get people to commit on where we go. So quantifying, this is the thing with business. In business, and not because I've always worked in business, this is maybe a few years now, but people have numbers and they'll tell you within 30 minutes you're going to lose. You're going to make a loss because the numbers are not adding up. So let's actually base a little bit more on data, because we start quantifying things, even in this sector, and defining precisely what we want to do. And it goes back to the why we do this. It starts feeding into all those questions that we ask ourselves. And then the last thing that I want to say is, oh, and this is going to be painful, and I don't even know how I get out of it if I'm wrong, but let me try. We like to look at leadership, but that challenges the next leader. So leadership, that, as Ali, you said, the vulnerability to take action needs to be nurtured and built. And I think that if you're somewhere there and you could actually, from a good heart, start mobilizing and leading, do it. Because if we wait for the traditional leaders, they are lost. Trust me, their world is crumbling more than many other people that are not in those big positions, because these guys are being looked at. Everyone is looking at them, and they have no answers. They have no clue. So take
And
lead.
you make a good point, which is, and interested to hear your thoughts, Jackie, on this, which is, for the last number of weeks, I've been having conversations with multiple people where we look around saying, where are the adults in the room, right? And the conclusion seems to be, I think it's us. But you just made a really interesting point, Andrew, which is the traditional leaders are the ones who kind of have the most to lose in this. And many of them are stepping up, and some of them are doing it in more vocal, and some are doing it in more behind the scenes. So I don't want to suggest that that's not happening. But it does also offer the space for people who maybe not in the past have seen themselves as the adults in the room, the leaders in the room, to step up and say, no, I can use my experience and my voice, because if not me, then who? Jackie, your thoughts on this question?
And maybe just to Jackie, 1 second. I think Ali, you also earlier said defining leadership. Redefining leadership. And maybe the people that are waiting for this, for what's my role, are also waiting for some, redefining and being open, being out there. Leadership can be this, can be that, can be that.
I don't know how many of us watched the show Weakest Link. It used to, I don't know if it still shows, but yeah, I loved watching it, and the metaphor I pick from that one often is, yes, we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so if we thought we were strong, maybe this is telling us maybe not, right? And so having to rebuild from that point where it is we, as Andrew said, and therefore I lean back into Ubuntu. I am because you are because we are. If COVID didn't teach us, and I guess we didn't learn, and I guess we will be in this classroom until we get the message, right? So yeah, maybe we need to stay in this class a little while until we learn that I am because you are because we are. We absolutely need each other up and down the chain. We are human, first and foremost. And so it sounds old, but I think we're landing right back where we started.
We just keep relearning the same lessons until we learn it, right? We just keep getting thrown back into the same situations. All right, we're going to we have 5 minutes left, and I want to do a final round of reflections. So we're going to keep it to as concise as possible. What is your biggest takeaway from this conversation? And what do we need the most right now? Do we need hope? Do we need a call to action? Do we need something tangible? And then what part of today's discussion deserves deeper exploration? Do you wish we could have gone into more? So that's like 6 questions all in one. Pick whichever one you would like as far as your final reflections. Let's go with Andrew. We'll go the opposite way on my screen here. Andrew, Jackie, and then we'll end with Ali.
You're holding your screen upwards, downwards. You should change it. So, all right, here is my reflections. I think oh, this is powerful. Thank you for putting this up, and for taking this bold step to say, hey, we are gonna ask the difficult questions. Let's talk about the difficult things, and we need to do more of this, because it seems we are shy of discussing these things. And again, I'll come back to the question: is it crumbling? Yes. And thank you so much, Ali, for that opening you gave. It's very clear. It's crumbling. The house is burning. So let's do something about it. We shouldn't pretend. And I know you're gonna do much more of this. So let's do much more of this. What the question that keeps running in my head that we could spend a little bit more time on is actually what do we call the next? How do we frame the next? Because right here we have a golden moment, if you can call it. It's an open moment right now where everyone sees what's happening, and I think we can catch the wave and implant some values, and that whether it's data-driven policy making, whether it's new ways of asking the why, whether it's what does leadership look like in the new context, whether it's let's demolish the models and build new ones. I think that we need to put some work on. So thank you so much, and nice sharing the panel with you, Jackie and Ali, and thank you for a good moderation, Kim.
Thank you. All right, Jackie, your final reflections.
Okay. I think we agreed even yesterday that a conversation is a moment in time. It will not fix everything. So let's keep coming back, because we'll go away, sleep on this, and come back with new and fresh ideas. So I'd love a repository of what are people trying? What are they experimenting with in this time and in this moment? What's working? What are they finding? What are they daring? What are they playing with? I think that would be helpful, but also, we don't have to wait for leaders to be congregated. We can congregate them right here. That wish for Ali. So let's do that and say, leaders, let's lock that room. What are we doing? And how are you navigating this moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Those
that.
would be my 2 things.
Thank you.
And my final words or reflections, I think all of us, we are facing conflicts, climate change, and so many challenges. But I believe that one of the main challenges that we are facing right now is internal challenge. It's the inefficiencies, it's the bureaucracies, and it's the system that is actually standing in our own way. And to be honest, I don't think we can fundraise our way out of this. And I don't think we can coordinate our way out of this. We must lead, and we must lead with courage. And we are going to take risks to be able to deal with these situations and think about simplifications, rethinking the system, and all that. And Right now in the call, the panelists and the participants, we are all coming from different backgrounds, from different locations. We speak different languages. But I know that all of us, we joined this call because we want to move in one direction, in the same direction. And this direction is about actions. And it's about reaching more people and supporting more communities. So my message to all of you today, please take any action. Just take action to put this fire down. Don't leave the house. We can save it. And don't discuss how we are going to arrange the chairs. We can do that later. But right now, take action, any action. Thank you so much for this super interesting and inspiring conversation. And I hope that in the future, we can deep dive into other topics and we can take the different things that we spoke about today to give a bit more practical examples. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you for being leaders in your respective fields. Thank you for being vulnerable today. And frankly, thank you just for an interesting and inspiring conversation. I said yesterday, we're just going to have fun, and I personally had fun. So thank you very much. Thank you to those on the call that were listening. As we said, this is the start of many conversations. The problem is big enough for us all to play our part. So until the next time, we will see you. Have a great day.